not iPhones, by the way. So whatever it is, you can go look at it, and then you can motivate yourself to do innovations to fix that problem if you think that that's the thing you want to concentrate on. But I think the key is that if you're going to start with innovation, you have to start with, this process is you have to remove uncertainty, right? So the first step of innovation is to, if you're thinking that there's some sort of market application and there's some sort of technology, is you got to go in and look at the details. That's how this process works, right? And so, you can be motivated by an idea like that, and then you start this innovation process by researching it, and then finding out, what are the numbers, right? And then, given the numbers, what's the cost, right? And that's what these people they're making a huge business now. If you look, the demand for cell phones in India and China is so large. These people realize that, look, I can take those things, refurbish them for X, and I can resell them and make 50% margin, right? And so there's actually multiple companies online now that do that. So you should not let your, if you're throwing out your old iPhone, you're throwing out like $90, 90 US, by the way, right?
Thank you. I have a question about how you bring innovation to reality, to the market, because it seems from your experiences that you work at AT&T Bell Labs, huge corporations with lots of money, lots of financial support, but yet they didn't want to move your innovation forward.
Yes.
They were in a position to take the risk, but they didn't.
Yes.
And it was interesting why. And then after that, you got some funding for your company, initial seed of money to allow you to do things. They were, I don't know who they were, but they were willing to take the risk.
Yes.
Because if it's not successful, your company could have gone.
That's right.
Broke, right? So it was interesting that people who can afford to take the risk didn't want to take the risk.
Indeed.
But people who are in a worse position or a less position to take the risk were willing to do it. So
Yes.
maybe you can share with us your experience, and we probably are interested in identifying who are willing to take the risk.
That's a really excellent point. In fact, it becomes very philosophical because it's about human beings, really. Your question's about humans, right? And I should say people. When I use humans, it's such an obvious I'm an engineer, right? But people are really the key thing, right? It has nothing to do with it has a little bit to do with the situation. But so let's break down on what you said. So Bell Labs, right? How could they not see that they should invest? Well, you have to look at the details, like we were just talking about with the environmental question. You have to break it down into details. So we have factories, right? And their job is to produce the current products, right? And then we have Bell Labs, and that worked really well. As I told you, lots of things are created. But, all those decisions for how to move forward and get the next sort of amount of finance within AT&T are essentially controlled by middle managers, right? Now, in a large corporation, one that's not designed correctly, one of the problems is middle managers are in the worst possible situation because they aren't the executives, right? And so therefore, they're the most risk-averse part of the corporation, right? If you're new at the bottom, nobody really cares because you're, seed corn, right? And if you're executive, it's the board essentially that, probably determines what's going on. But middle managers are essentially, asked to do risk, but the truth is, to save their job, they should probably avoid risk, right? So I think that's a fundamental problem if you're organized in a big vertical. Now, HP, to try to get around that, for years it worked, until then, of course, they merged like Compaq with HP and made a gigantic elephant. But in the old days, HP used to keep on breaking up into 100-person units to try to avoid this problem of risk aversion in the middle part of a company, right? So that was, in the old days, the 20th century corporation, the way it was designed, that was a key problem there. In terms of finance, when we formed AmberWave, it was venture capital for that company. And the venture capital existed in that time period because of two factors. The information age produced lots of capital, and people that made money off the information age learned that if they put it back to work, it could produce even more capital, right? So there's a ton of capital floating around at the end of this period, which is why people think about venture capital in that time period, the 90s, right? The other thing is that the US Fed kept on lowering interest rates since the 90s, so it made even more capital become available. The problem was too much capital got produced, and so what happened eventually is there's too much money chasing too few ideas. So that actually blew up, eventually. So, I think venture capital, in a way, at the beginning of the cycle was very useful, and at the end of the cycle, it actually destroyed more innovations than helped, because venture capital comes in, it wants a particular return in a particular window, and it actually makes the companies change to try to get capital return in that time period. Now this might all be very disturbing to all of you because it sounds like I'm telling you there is no exact way to do this, and the answer is this process has to happen, and what you have to do at any point in history is try to figure out how to get the thing to the next level. How do you move it from one part to next? And it will always change in US history. For example, all the great MIT companies that built MIT's name were formed in an age where there was no venture capital. A lot of the MIT companies were formed in the 50s, 60s, 70s that made MIT famous. Teradyne, Ray Stata's company, Analog Devices. These companies were all formed in those time period where there was no venture capital. Like I said before, most small, high-growth companies in the United States aren't funded by venture capital. So, I think that the answer is any mechanism possible, including your own revenue. So I'll give you an example. I could see the changes, and I knew that if I took venture capital for this company that I have, 4Power, I knew that it would destroy the company actually. So what do? The answer is our market actually, if you look at who was buying this stuff in the early stages, it's a smaller market, so it's not this gigantic market that everybody was hoping for. But to get started, I focused on a small government market. In that case, where I could sell directly to the U.S. government, and then I made profit enough that then I could keep it going, right, until I built up volume, right? Another way is you say, well, if you look at AmberWave, before we took venture capital, we actually got a contract from Motorola. So I went to a company and I said, do you want this? And I actually got paid to create prototypes, and that's how I started that company, right? So each time, I think it's a little bit different depending on macroeconomic, where you are in a cycle, what's happening. I can tell you this, if you were to listen to what I'm saying, and it sounds like a lot of work, I mean it is, right? Because it's never the same each time, and the better you get at it, the more that you want to form something in a certain way, the more difficult it is to make sure that the financing doesn't distort the company, right? So I'm not a firm believer in overprescribing, the financing aspect, because you can't, Thailand also is going to be different from Singapore, is going to be different from the US, and they're going to change over time. Here's my prediction for the US. As interest rates go up, we're going to go into, and I believe the world will go into, a saving and investment cycle as opposed to a debt expansionary cycle. So we've been, over 30 years, mostly everybody, everything's related to taking on debt and expanding, right? But that's largely because most governments have been printing currency, right? So what's going to happen is interest rates are going to go up, and we're going to go into a savings and investment cycle, which means, by the way, that if you don't have indigenous innovation, growth is going to be extremely difficult. So, I think what Thailand's trying to do, well, what SCG was trying to say by saying we have to invest in the future, I think is correct, because in this next phase, if you don't have innovation in a company, it's going to be really tough sledding for 10 years, right? And the good news about that for engineers and scientists is that what this means in investment and savings cycle is that the only way you can go above that bar of interest rate is to have innovation. Otherwise, you can't make profit, right? So the exciting thing is that we are in a global innovation minimum, and that anybody who can innovate is going to be at a premium. There's not enough innovators around. So basically it means that there'll be over demand for many, many years. And for engineers and scientists that can produce new things, it's going to be a very exciting time, even though macroeconomically it might be a little depressing. So you're going to have engineers and scientists probably making a lot of money, and hopefully they can produce companies that will increase employment for everyone, right? So that's the objective. That's why I'm so passionate about innovation, is that I think that worldwide there's going to be a big change coming, and we have to be ready.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Benjamin Ten Buren, a second-year mechanical engineering student. I want to know that with the strained silicon, when you come to think about it now, it sounds a bit obvious because there is silicon in smartphones and something like that. But that time, why did you come up with the idea of making silicon? You could have invented something else or something like that. And why were you confident enough to build a company on your own? Because you're not sure it's going to be successful or not, but you did it, and it sounds successful.
Yeah, so the first question is exactly to further what you just said. The entire time when AmberWave was working with all these companies worldwide, we were working with their development and research organizations, and every one of them told us, even when they knew it was a huge problem, by the way, they all told us that, oh, that's very interesting, Gene, but we like you, but this is never going to be deployed. It's fantastic. We like working with you. We have to be prepared for the future, but it's not going to happen. And they would always tell me 1,000 reasons why it's not going to happen. And then one day, right? It's pretty amazing, actually. IBM comes out and says, actually, this is the technology that needs to be ready. It is ready, and it's going to be deployed sometime in the next few years in integrated circuit. Well, when they did that, the press all of a sudden was all over it. Then 2 years later, Intel said they're going to actually release product with it, and they're the only ones we really weren't working with, right? And with those two announcements, all of a sudden, all the people we're working with that were telling us that this will never see the light of day, seriously, within like 6 months, all of them were in the press saying that, oh yeah, strained silicon's clearly the thing that's going to be ready. And it was always obvious that it was. That's why we've been working on it. Of course, they were working on it with us, right? So these things always work that way. They never, ever tell you ahead of time. It's just like this event. And then all of a sudden, everybody says, oh yeah, it's obvious. But it's not just in this area, it's every area. Like humans kind of operate that way, right? They kind of say no, 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 and then bam, they say, yeah, it's going to happen with interest rates, right? I mean, what's happening here, everybody keeps on denying what's going on, right? As a scientist, I keep on saying, well, this is like pretty obvious, right? And denials everywhere, all governments, everybody. Interest rates are already starting to go up. They're going to skyrocket, and you're going to see all sorts of weird stuff. Afterwards, everybody's going to go, oh yeah, it was so obvious. Well, nobody's talking about it now, right? So it's just human behavior, and innovation is just exemplifying that same human behavior where even though things are always changing, people imagine that they stay the same. Now we can get into why that is. But it's the way people are. They always imagine things staying the same when actually there's always events that are slowly going to change everything, always, right? And then when it happens, they kind of go, oh yeah, it was like pretty obvious, right? Now, the latter part of your question was, well, how do you deal with that, right? So, first of all, when I was giving a talk at, MIT has a collaboration with Russia and Skoltech. They're trying to build a MIT-like organization over there. And I could tell that in that audience, they were expecting that someone has the answer, right? Like it's the investor knows what they want, or the company does, or whatever, right? And so I felt it necessary to say the following. I said, in any of these things I've done, potential customers don't really know what's going to happen. Investors don't know what's going to happen. The government doesn't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen, right? This process is about de-risking because no one can predict the future, right? So what it is trying to keep on letting these things interact so that you have little tiny failures that lead you down a path that then actually happens, and then afterwards everybody says, oh yeah, that was obvious, right? So I think that the thing to realize and to be motivated by yourself is that actually nobody knows, right? Now, that's why it's so important to fill out market application, implementation, whatever, constantly with talking to companies, talking to people in government, talking to, because no one knows, but if you work the hardest at trying to put that together over time, right, then you can have the confidence that at least you stand the highest chance of anybody doing it if it's going to happen, right? And I think that now when it comes to personal interaction, here's how you deal with the negativity, because it's an inherently negative process, right? So when somebody makes a comment on what you're doing, you have to parse out the personal things from the factual things, because sometimes the factual things they say are data, and you want to take it in to help you narrow this innovation process, right? So a lot of people might be just negative and there's no content, and you have to learn to just ignore it because they're focusing on things that aren't going to help you with the innovation process. They'll say, well, that'll never work because basically they don't like you or something, right? And so you just ignore that because it's not useful to you, right? Now that's easy to say, but it's hard to do, right? Because you're trying to stay motivated, right? Now, some people will combine those two things, and you have to stay open-minded. They'll say, you have huge challenges in front of you. You are a worthless worm, and you can't do this and that. And in there they say something important like, you should look at this factor, and what about the cost of this? And you hadn't thought about those things, right? So in that thing of negativity, you got to learn to siphon out those two things and go back and think about them and say, hey, does that affect the way I was thinking, right? And now it comes to the personal thing, how do you do all this and stay motivated? And I think it comes down to this balance between staying optimistic but being intellectually honest, right? That's the trick. And again, I think we can teach this. We don't teach it at all, right? And this is how real engineering in Vannevar Bush's context works, right? You're a little bit of each one of those things trying to figure this out when nobody on the planet knows how to do it, right? And I think that if you give students confidence that, hey, it's all the same, it's the same human process throughout history, right? And tell them it's okay, I think they're way better off than if you tell them it's all about problem set, and if you calculate this, off by 0.001, your life will be horrible or something, right? So I think we can do a better job at preparing you guys for solving those real world problems. Does that answer your question? Stay motivated.
Okay. I am in third year Information and Communication Engineering, and I believe that all of us view MIT as the top university for engineer and dream that someday we might get a chance to go there and
All right,
maybe
thank
study
you.
there. So I would like to ask you, do you have any advice for us as the university students to become an innovator and maybe apply for MIT in the future?
Well, you should definitely apply for MIT in the future. I mean, the problem is that I think one of the reasons edX, I'm very excited about that, is that in the old model, there can only be so many people that come to sit in classrooms and all that, right? But the new model that I see MIT in the future is classroom education's online, and you can get all the same information that MIT student would have, and then expand the campus to include more experiential learning from people around the world to come and learn about innovation and work on new problems like that, right? So I actually hope that we can create new models where we can work with more people around the world. You know, the innovation class that I'm launching in the fall, if you look at the sign-up list, it's going to have 40, I don't know if I said this before, but it's 40 to 50,000 students are going to be on there, right? So if you think about that, it would have taken me 100 to 1,000 years in the old model to reach that many students, right? So if people don't think, I mean, those factors are typical of a fundamental innovation. Like 100 to 1,000 years in every class, right, is being accelerated. Those people in universities that think this is not going to affect something are definitely the same people that we're going to wake up like 5 years from now and say, oh yeah, that was always obvious, right? But of course, they'll probably be unemployed or something, right? So I think that MIT is going to, through some experimentation, be able to reach more people, even if you, in the old model, you can't, go there. Motivation for innovators, I say this, I have to ask you guys, why are you doing science and engineering, right? It's one of the harder things to do, right? So presumably you're doing some hard work because you want to have some impact, right? And so you saw my definition. That means that you're an innovator by definition, because if you're studying all that so you can, do the purple part well, then, and you want to have impact, it means that you want to have something happen in the world, then that makes you an innovator. So you're already an innovator if that's the case, I know there could be other motivations being in science and engineering, like, your parents made you go or something. But, the question is, can you turn that around into something that motivates you? You have to be motivated to work hard. And I think that having impact in the world is a great motivator for doing that. So the answer is you're already an innovator, right? All right.
I'm sorry, with Sivinan, fourth year student from industrial engineering. From my understanding, you have to be a visionary person so that we can see the opportunity in the future market or maybe future technology. Is that right? And
Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't quite understand that.
I have to be a visionary person. So
Oh, you have to be a visionary person.
yeah, so that we can see the opportunity in the future market or the future technology. So if you have to be a visionary person, so how can we become
A visionary.
yeah.
Okay, so a couple things. One is the reason to educate people on this process doesn't mean that everyone has to be Steve Jobs to contribute, right? So that's lesson number one. And if you read the book, one of the things we point out is that this de-risking process is an investment process. So if you're an investor and you want to invest in the future, whether you're a government or a private investor, you actually need to understand this process so you can look in each area and understand what's going on. So even if you're not trying to be the visionary innovator, you need to know about this. And this is my argument for teaching it, kind of creating like Innovation 101, is that I think it should be a basic course that it doesn't matter who you are, this is how growth occurs in society. It's how people do innovation, and we better start teaching it to everyone so at least they understand it. Right now, just like anything else, if you do have Innovation 101, the question is, what's my role in that, right? And just like today, everybody's going to have different passions, right? People are going to migrate. Some people are going to be investors, and they're going to want to help support people, at different stages of this, right? Some people are going to want to, be in a company where maybe it was created or is propagating by some vision of a leader, and they want to help. They want to understand this, but they want to focus on some of those purple dots, because they want to put that together so that it feeds into the bigger innovation process of the team or something, right? Now, you said something very interesting, which is that it is true that someone like Steve Jobs, right, can do the de-risking process of all three of these elements in their head, right? And if you look at how he organized Apple when he was alive, he is basically the one who has this process in his head, and he has people, when he was alive, that are bringing him the information for that de-risking process. So he would have people telling, for example, the way they would do that is they would go to their suppliers and they would ask them, not only what do you have today, but tell me about what you're going to be giving me potentially 2 or 3 years from now. And that allowed them to fill out their uncertainty in technology, right? He would be having discussions, have his people go on, have discussions with Comcast, or like telecom companies, and all these, so that they could fill out the market application space, right? Now, not everybody has to be organized that way, because not everybody is going to be Steve Jobs, right? So, what we talk about a little bit in a very short part of the book is that usually that's not going to be the case. So if you want to create a little team to start innovating in a particular area, you actually want to get 2 or 3 people together that have different experience in a couple of those areas. So for example, the last thing you want to do is what people did in the 90s in the US, where they take a pure business person, and then they take a pure engineer, and then they take some operations person, and they expect them to work together to do this iteration. The reason that doesn't work is that de-risking process requires weighting of different factors in there, right? You actually need to be able to understand each other's area in order to work together to figure out how do you rate things. You know what I mean? If you can't even talk the same language, how are you going to do this process, right? So what that says is that whether you're going to be the Uber innovator or you're going to participate in a small innovation team, it says that you start at the university probably with a good technical background, and then what you want to do is develop all that information about implementation and market application over time, right? And one of the best ways to do that is to work in a company, right? If you go into a particular sector, you work in a company, you can find out about those markets that they work in, right? You can find out about how the company's business models. Doesn't mean that your idea that might not follow those exact things, but you have to know about them, right? And so as you accumulate this, whether you become the Steve Jobs, where you actually realize that you can do all this yourself in your head, and then you need to develop those kind of people around you, or whether you realize, hey, I'm pretty good at technology and I understand how to think about these applications. I can deal with uncertainty in applications, but like the whole operations thing and factory, I can understand it, but I don't have much experience in it. That's okay, because you're playing one role. You can match up with someone else who brings in the other interdisciplinary piece, and then together you guys can work together that way, right? So I want to make sure that's clear that this process is the fundamental process. You can deal with it remotely in certain jobs in the world. You can get a little bit closer, or you know, if you're fortunate to be able to deal with all that uncertainty simultaneously all the time and stay married, then you could be Steve Jobs, right?
Thank you very much for your amazing speech and